When life destroys without warning, only one choice remains: surrender or be reborn. Bianca Santillan, betrayed on her wedding day, did not break. From her ruins emerged a stronger woman, capable of transforming each wound into strength. This is the story of those who, even in their worst moment, decide to write a destiny that pain cannot erase. 180 guests, a string orchestra, white petals scattered like blessings on the entrance carpet. Everything seemed perfect. Everything had been planned, except for Daniel's absence. Bianca checked her phone for the 5th time. No calls, no messages. But there was an envelope delivered discreetly by a messenger at the church doors. The envelope had no return address. Trembling, Bianca broke the seal. Inside, a handwritten note with the handwriting she knew so well. "I cannot do this. You are too wonderful for the lie I have become. Forgive me, Daniel." The sound of the letter falling resonated like thunder in her chest. The church doors were about to open, but the bride did not enter. The orchestra ceased. The silence was crueler than any sad music. Being betrayed was a pain. Being betrayed in front of everyone was a shattering. But Bianca didn't scream. She didn't cry. She simply turned around, in silence, and walked barefoot out of the church, alone. And in that simple act, without words, began the greatest turn in her life. Elena, her best friend and maid of honor, ran after her with eyes full of tears and contained fury. "What happened? Where is Daniel? Bianca, for God's sake, talk to me." Bianca handed her the letter without saying a word. Her eyes, strangely dry, seemed to look at something distant, a horizon that only she could see. "Call everyone. Tell them to go home," she said in a voice that didn't seem like her own, a voice that sounded too serene for the chaos she must have been feeling. "But Bianca, please, Elena, just do it." While Elena returned to the church to communicate what no one wanted to hear, Bianca remained motionless under a magnolia tree, the same magnolias she had chosen to decorate the central aisle where she was supposed to walk toward a future that had now evaporated like fog under the merciless sun of reality. The guests began to leave confused, some with expressions of disbelief, others with poorly disguised compassion on their faces. Bianca observed them from afar, like someone watching a movie in which she had accidentally been the protagonist. When the last car left the cathedral parking lot, Bianca finally allowed herself a gesture. She took off the high-heeled shoes she had chosen with such care, those shoes that symbolized the steps toward her new life. She held them in her hands for a moment, contemplating their pearly sparkles, and then simply let them fall alongside the white petals that were now turning yellowish under the midday heat. She walked barefoot toward the main street. She had no clear destination, but she knew with certainty that she couldn't return to the apartment she had shared with Daniel for 3 years, that place where they had planned every detail of the wedding for 18 months, where she had packed both their lives in labeled boxes for the move to their new house, the one with a large garden for the children they would now never have together. Wandering through the city in a wedding dress that now seemed like a cruel irony, Bianca stopped in front of a small cafe. Through the glass, she could see a family celebrating what appeared to be a birthday. Genuine laughter, spontaneous hugs, unrehearsed happiness. When had been the last time she had felt that lightness? Had she ever really experienced it with Daniel? The questions came like waves, one after another, while finally the tears began to flow. Not tears for Daniel, surprisingly, but for herself. For the Bianca who had spent the last 5 years of her life carefully building a future that now revealed itself as an elaborate illusion. Elena found her there, paralyzed in front of the cafe, with smeared makeup forming black furrows on her cheeks. Without saying a word, she hugged her tightly, as if trying to hold together the fragments of her friend that threatened to scatter with the breeze. "Let's go to my house," Elena whispered softly. "You can't stay like this." In Elena's apartment, Bianca finally allowed them to remove her wedding dress. Every pearl, every lace applique seemed to mock her as Elena carefully unbuttoned the 34 buttons on the back. 34 promises that now unraveled one by one. How could he do this to me? The question escaped from her lips almost involuntarily as the dress fell, forming a pool of fabric at her feet. Elena had no answers, only hugs and an understanding silence that was worth more than 1,000 empty words of consolation. That night, after a hot bath and wrapped in borrowed clothes that smelled of someone else's life, Bianca sat on the balcony of Elena's apartment. The nocturnal city displayed before her thousands of lights, thousands of lives in movement, while hers seemed to have stopped in a painful parenthesis. Her phone wouldn't stop ringing with messages of condolence, concerned questions, and some social media notifications where rumors about the bride abandoned at the altar were already circulating. The news was spreading like a wildfire, consuming what dignity she had left. With a decisive gesture, Bianca turned off the phone. She wasn't ready to face the world, to become an object of pity or a topic of conversation during strangers' family dinners. She needed silence. She needed space to understand what had happened and, more importantly, what would happen now. "Tomorrow I'll cancel everything," said Elena, referring to the pending wedding arrangements. The banquet, the honeymoon, the gifts that had to be returned. "You don't have to worry about anything." Bianca nodded weakly. The emotional exhaustion was beginning to manifest physically, like a crushing weight on her shoulders. "Do you want me to call your parents?" Elena asked cautiously. "No," Bianca responded firmly. "I don't want to see the disappointment in their eyes. Not now." What Bianca didn't say out loud was that she couldn't bear to see reflected in her parents' eyes what she already felt inside, that she had failed at the most basic level, at being good enough for someone to want to build a life by her side. That night, while Elena slept in the adjacent room, Bianca remained awake, contemplating the ceiling as if she could find in it the answers she needed. At some point in the early morning, when the silence was almost absolute, she made a decision. She would not allow this betrayal to define her. She didn't know exactly how, but she refused to become poor Bianca, the one who was abandoned at the altar. She would be something more, someone more. With that thought crystallizing in her mind, she finally surrendered to sleep. A restless sleep populated with empty churches and letters without return addresses. While she slept, her fingers unconsciously clung to the sheets like someone holding onto the edge of a precipice, determined not to fall. Bianca's house had become a museum of what could have been. Every corner harbored unfulfilled promises. The French dinnerware set with their intertwined initials. The Italian coffee machine that Daniel had insisted on including in the wedding. Registry, the empty frames that awaited photographs from their honeymoon in Greece. 3 weeks had passed since the day that should have marked the beginning of their shared life. 3 weeks in which time seemed to have stopped in a limbo of unanswered messages and calls diverted to voicemail. Bianca had cut her long brown hair to shoulder length in an impulse that even she didn't completely understand. Perhaps it was a primitive way to mark a before and after, to physically detach from the woman she had been. Or maybe it was simply the deep desire not to recognize herself when looking in the mirror. The person who looked back at her every morning was a stranger. Sunken eyes surrounded by dark circles, permanently dry lips, pale cheeks where a natural blush once flourished. This new Bianca moved through the house like a ghost, passing among objects barely touching them, as if fearing that contact could unleash memories she was too tired to relive. Her phone remained silenced in a drawer. She only checked it once a day, usually at nightfall, when she gathered enough courage to face the outside world. The notifications had reduced considerably. The drama of The Abandoned Bride was no longer news. The world had continued turning while she remained static. Only Elena kept sending daily messages, small anchors of normality in the midst of the storm. "Do you need anything from the supermarket? They're showing your favorite movie tonight. I left food at your door. Just heat it up." Bianca responded with monosyllables or emojis that pretended to convey she was fine, that she was dealing with everything. It was a merciful lie that both tacitly accepted. One particularly gray afternoon, while mechanically organizing the wedding gifts that had to be returned, she found a small box she didn't remember seeing before. The label indicated it was from Teresa, her maternal grandmother. Inside was a worn leather journal and a brief note. "Dear Bianca, this journal accompanied me in the darkest years and also in the brightest ones. Now I want it to be yours, not for you to write a perfect story, but a true one. With eternal love, Grandma Teresa." Bianca caressed the journal's cover with trembling fingers. Her grandmother had survived the loss of her husband when she was barely 30 years old and had raised 3 children alone in a foreign country. Teresa had never been one for many words, but her silent strength had always been an inspiration to Bianca. That night, for the first time in weeks, Bianca turned on her desk lamp. With a pen that felt strangely heavy between her fingers, she opened the journal and began to write. "I don't know who I am without Daniel. For 5 years, I was the girlfriend of, the fiancée of, the future wife of. Now I am who? The abandoned one? The one who wasn't enough? Today I realize that I don't remember what I liked to do before meeting him. I don't remember what I dreamed about before his dreams intertwined with mine until they became indistinguishable." The words flowed with a brutal honesty that surprised her. There was no room for self-pity in those pages, only a desperate search for clarity. She wrote until her fingers hurt and her eyes burned from contained tears. The following days established a new routine. Bianca woke up late, prepared coffee, that she rarely finished drinking, and then sat in front of the journal. Sometimes she wrote for hours. Other times she barely managed to complete a line before the weight of reality overwhelmed her. Gradually, between word and word, an uncomfortable truth began to emerge. Her relationship with Daniel had been dying, long before he abandoned her at the altar. The signs had been there, small cracks in the facade of perfection that both had meticulously constructed. Conversations that became increasingly superficial. Plans that she always initiated while he nodded with an enthusiasm she now recognized as forced. That growing silence between them that they had filled with wedding preparations instead of confronting. If one morning, while rereading previous entries in her journal, Bianca realized something that momentarily left her breathless. She hadn't written Daniel's name in 3 whole days. Her reflections had turned toward herself, toward how she had allowed her identity to be diluted in the relationship until almost disappearing. That same day, for the first time in a month, Bianca opened the curtains wide. The midday light flooded the apartment, revealing a layer of dust on the furniture and the accumulated disorder. In an impulse that arose from the deepest part of her being, she began to clean frantically. Hours later, the apartment sparkled with an almost clinical cleanliness. Bianca paused in front of the open closet, where some of Daniel's shirts still hung, ones he hadn't taken in his hasty departure. She observed them like someone looking at artifacts from a remote past, without the pang of pain she expected to feel. With decisive movements, she unhooked each garment and placed them in a cardboard box. There was no place for ghosts in her new beginning. That night, after her long shower under water so hot it reddened her skin, Bianca sat again in front of her journal. But this time, instead of looking to the past, she began to outline possibilities. Always wanted to learn photography, travel without rigid itineraries, try foods I can't pronounce in countries whose languages I don't speak. Why did I let those desires go dormant? At what point did I allow my dreams to become so small, so domesticated? As the night progressed, Bianca felt something she had believed lost forever. Curiosity. Curiosity to discover who she could be now, that she had the opportunity to completely redefine herself. The next day, early in the morning, she did something that even to her seemed impulsive. She called the travel agency where they had booked her frustrated honeymoon and canceled the package to Santorini. Instead, using the money she had saved for years for the wedding, she booked a one-way flight to Buenos Aires. When Elena found out about the plan, she tried to dissuade her. "Bianca, I understand that you need a change, but Argentina, alone. With no return date? This is extreme." Extreme was standing in a wedding dress in front of an empty church, Bianca responded with a serenity that surprised them both. "This is necessary. At least wait a little longer. Give yourself time to process everything. I've spent 5 years waiting for my life to officially begin after the wedding. I'm not going to wait one more day." Elena recognized in her friend's eyes a determination she hadn't seen in a long time. Reluctantly, she offered to take her to the airport the following week. The days before the trip passed in a frenzy of preparations. Bianca sold most of her belongings, leaving only the essentials in a small storage unit. She returned the wedding gifts with handwritten thank you notes. She called her parents to inform them of her decision, stoically enduring the arguments against it and the anxious questions. "It will only be for a while," she assured them, although not even she knew how long this getaway would last, or if it really was a getaway and not something more definitive. The night before her departure, Bianca received a text message. It was from Daniel, the first since the letter he had left at the church. "I just found out about your trip. Can we talk before you leave?" Bianca contemplated the words on the screen for a long time. A part of her, an increasingly smaller part, felt the pull of the past, the temptation to seek answers, or perhaps even closure. Finally, with firm fingers, she deleted the message without responding. There was nothing Daniel could say now that would change what he had done, and more importantly, there was nothing Bianca needed to hear to continue. That night, while packing the last objects into a backpack that seemed ridiculously small to contain all that was left of her life, Bianca paused in front of the mirror. The woman who looked back at her was still a stranger in many ways. But for the first time in weeks, she saw something familiar in her eyes. Resolution. She didn't know what she would find in Argentina or in any other place where this impulse of reinvention might take her. But she knew with certainty what she was leaving behind. The version of herself who had lived to please others' expectations. The woman who had confused love with external validation. On the last page of her journal, before closing it and carefully storing it in her backpack, Bianca wrote a single sentence. "Silence no longer frightens me, because I am finally listening to my own voice." The plane landed at Ezeiza International Airport with a jolt that seemed symbolic. Buenos Aires received Bianca with a clear sky and a warm breeze that gently stirred her newly cut hair as she waited for a taxi. "Where shall I take you, miss?" asked the driver with a melodic accent that immediately made her conscious of her academic Spanish, too correct, too textbook. Bianca hesitated. She hadn't booked a hotel. She had no itinerary. For the first time in her adult life, she didn't have a meticulously traced plan. "To the center, please," she finally responded. "Someplace where I can find an economical hostel." The taxi driver observed her through the rear view mirror with benevolent curiosity. "First time in Argentina?" "First time traveling alone. she answered with an honesty that surprised her. The man nodded understandingly, as if that simple phrase had revealed her entire story. "I'll take you to San Telmo. It's pretty, safe for a woman alone, and with good hostels." During the journey, Bianca observed the city with hungry eyes. Buenos Aires unfolded before her like an open book. Buildings with European architecture next to modern skyscrapers, exuberant parks, bustling streets where people seemed to move at a rhythm different from the frantic pace of her hometown. The IA taxi stopped in front of an old building with a colonial-style facade. "El Hostal del Viajero," announced the driver. "My niece worked here. They are good people." Bianca thanked him with a genuine smile, the first in weeks that didn't feel forced. She paid the fare and added a generous tip that the man acknowledged with a gesture of his hand. The hostel turned out to be exactly what she needed, simple but clean, with an interior patio where young people of diverse nationalities conversed animatedly. The receptionist, a middle-aged woman named Mariana, assigned her a bed in a shared room with 3 other female travelers. "How long are you staying with us?" she asked while registering Bianca's passport. "I'm not sure," she admitted. "Maybe a week or more." Mariana smiled with complicity. "Ah, a trip with no return date. The best kind, if you'll allow my opinion." That night, Bianca sat in the hostel's patio with a new notebook bought at a nearby stationery store and a glass of Malbec wine. Around her, other guests exchanged travel stories, advice about non-touristy places, and occasionally some personal anecdote. A particularly noisy group was celebrating the birthday of a Canadian girl. Bianca observed them from her corner, feeling simultaneously alien to that camaraderie and strangely comforted by it. "May I sit?" A voice with a marked Australian accent interrupted her thoughts. It was a woman approximately her age, with hair dyed a vibrant blue color and a constellation of freckles on her nose. "Of course," replied Bianca, closing her notebook almost reflexively. "I'm Sophie." The newcomer introduced herself as she settled into the adjacent chair. "I saw you arrived this afternoon. First night, right?" Bianca nodded, surprised by the familiarity with which the stranger treated her. "I'm Bianca." "Vacation or escape?" asked Sophie naturally, like someone asking about the weather. "Excuse me? People come to hostels for 2 reasons, Sophie explained with a conspiratorial smile. Plan vacations with a tight budget or impulsive escapes from something or someone. And you, with that look and that recent haircut, are definitely in the escape category. Bianca couldn't help but laugh at such a reading. In another time, she would have felt offended by the presumption. Now, she found refreshing that frankness lacking social filters. "I suppose I am escaping," she admitted. "Is it that obvious?" Sophie shrugged. "I have a radar for broken hearts. 3 months ago, I was exactly where you are now, only in Bangkok, and with my hair dyed pink. And did it work? The escape, I mean. I'm here, aren't I? 10,000 kilometers from where I started, talking with a stranger in a patio in Buenos Aires, instead of crying over the same man who cheated on me with my roommate." Sophie raised her beer in an ironic toast. "I'd call that progress." That night, without planning to, Bianca ended up joining the birthday celebration. Between toasts and broken conversations in several languages, she found herself telling fragments of her story. To her surprise, no one reacted with the pity she had. "So feared. My ex left me for my best friend," shared a Brazilian guy. "I canceled my wedding 3 days before," confessed a serious-looking German woman. "Better before than after, believe me." "My boyfriend of 5 years turned out to be married," added another voice from the back. Each story was like a small mirror where Bianca could see aspects of her own pain reflected, but also the implicit promise of overcoming. All these strangers had survived their own emotional catastrophes, and now were here, laughing under the Argentine stars. When she finally retired to sleep past midnight, Bianca realized that she had spent hours without thinking about Daniel. The discovery left her momentarily disoriented, as if she had forgotten something important, but then she smiled in the darkness of the shared bedroom. The following days established an improvised routine. Bianca woke up early, had breakfast in the patio with whoever was available for a morning chat, and then went out to explore the city without a fixed destination. Buenos Aires revealed itself to her in fragments. The elegant melancholy of historic cafes, the overflowing passion in the milongas where couples danced tango until dawn, the reflective quietness of ancient bookstores where time seemed to stop. At the end of the first week, money was running out faster than expected. Bianca calculated her expenses with growing concern. At this rate, she would have to return much sooner than she wished. The solution came unexpectedly during a dinner at the hostel. Mariana, the receptionist, mentioned that the cafe on the corner was looking for a waitress for the morning shift. They don't have many customers at that hour, but they need someone reliable, she explained while serving pasta to the guests. The owner is a friend of mine. I can recommend you. That's how Bianca, who had always worked in elegant corporate offices, found herself serving coffee and croissants at El Descanso, a small establishment frequented mainly by neighborhood retirees. The work was simple but surprisingly satisfying. Regular customers quickly adopted the foreigner, as they affectionately called her. They taught her expressions in lunfardo, recommended places away from the tourist circuit, and occasionally told her stories from their lives that sounded like serialized novels. Don Alberto, a former literature professor of 82 who punctually came every morning, became her favorite. He always ordered the same thing, black coffee without sugar and a croissant, and always brought a different book that inevitably ended up being lent to Bianca. To understand Argentina, you must read its writers, he insisted with the authority that only 8 decades of passionate readings can grant. Thanks to him, Bianca immersed herself in the words of Borges, Cortázar, Silvina Ocampo, and Pizarnik. She read during her breaks and before sleeping, finding in those texts echoes of her own experience of uprooting and searching. One afternoon, 2 weeks after her arrival, Sophie appeared at El Descanso with an unexpected proposal.